Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah here from TBA Law. I'm a solicitor here, and I'm here today to talk about downsizing from a large property to something a bit smaller that suits people. This talk will be particularly relevant to elderly couples and those who are retiring, and I'll talk a bit about retirement villages and the different sorts of processes that can be used for that as well. So we'll jump straight into it. The first really aspect, I guess, is selling your current home, which is a very big decision for most people. So obviously people have often been in these homes for decades, so selling is a big step for them. Obviously you might be already familiar with the conveyancing process for selling a house, and I'll go over that briefly, but I guess the first step really is to list your house with an agent, and the agent will take the photos and talk to you about listing price and all that kind of stuff. But you'll also need to engage someone like us to do the conveyancing side of the work for you. So the first step is, as you may be aware, preparing what's called a vendor statement or a Section 32. So they're documents that contain essentially all the relevant information about the sale of a property. So whether it be the rates, the zoning, the size of the property, it also shows all the details about the title. So if there's a mortgage on the property, if there's a caveat, all that kind of stuff. We also prepare what's called a contract of sale, which is the document that allows for the sale of the house itself. And these can be conditional on a couple of things. When you find a purchaser, it might be conditional upon finance, it might be conditional upon the sale of the current house, perhaps. Other things that can be conditional upon are just people completing certain works to the house and other kinds of things. So the first step really is to have those documents prepared and have a purchaser sign the contracts. Once they become unconditional, so those conditions are met, then we move towards settlement. So that includes us preparing stamp duty forms that the purchaser needs to sign. The vendor also needs to sign them, but the reason is not so the vendor can pay stamp duty, but to verify the information the purchaser is providing to the State Revenue Office. Eventually we'll get to what's called settlement date, and that's the date that the property actually settles and you need to be out and the purchaser takes possession. About a week prior to settlement, we prepare what's called adjustments. The purpose of adjustments is to ensure that the rates and other outgoings of the property are divided equally between the parties. So what we do is we figure out a daily rate for perhaps the rates, for example, and then we figure out how many days the purchaser owns the property and how many days the vendor owns the property, and we adjust them so that they work out equal. We also, sort of figure out how much needs to be paid out against a mortgage if there is one, how much needs to be paid out for other things like our fees, the agent's commission as well also gets paid from that, and at the balance you get the balance of the funds at settlement. It now all happens electronically, so it is a very quick process, and the funds often clear into accounts within hours, but it can be days at times. So once you've sold your home, which is the big first scary step, it's then time to find another property. And there are several different ways you can downsize, and I guess the simplest one to talk about is just buying another property. So you might buy a smaller house, maybe out in the country, or something different, to what you had, that's maybe easier to maintain and look after and more suitable to your needs as you get older. And the process for buying a house is essentially in reverse of what I just explained for selling the house. So you find a house you like, you put in an offer. It might need to be conditional upon something, whether that be the sale of your older house, whether it be finance, or something like that. Once you've found a house and you've signed a contract and it's gone unconditional, then we prepare the stamp duty forms, and we also look at stamp duty concessions you can get. So ones that often apply can be a pensioner concession if this is going to be your principal place of residence, which can give quite a substantial discount. The second one would be something along the lines of principal place of residence concession, which is eligible to some properties as well. They're the main ones that will probably be applicable in this situation. However, there are others, and they can be discussed in more detail if needed. Once we've done the stamp duty forms, the next step is to really prepare for settlement. So we liaise with both you if you're providing all the funds, or your bank if you've got a bank providing some funds, and we prepare adjustments as well. So like I explained before with adjustments for selling the property, we also prepare them for when you're purchasing to make sure that we're paying the vendor out for any money they've already paid for the property. Once all prepared and all that's done, we then prepare for settlement, and the settlement date is the date you can take the keys. So again, buying a smaller house is probably the simplest solution. And we can also give advice prior to buying a house on the house, its zoning and all the attachments, and on that vendor statement in section 32 that we've talked about previously. Similar to buying a house, something you could look at doing is buying a unit. The processes are almost identical, or I will say identical. However, there's often one more thing to be aware of when buying a unit, and that's what's called an owner's corporation. So an owner's corporation is when there's common property. In units, it's often shared driveways, shared gardens, that kind of stuff. An owner's corporation manages that, so they have public liability in case someone hurts themselves on that. They might maintain the gardens and pay for a gardener. Sometimes, you know, a unit complex might have a pool or some other sort of communal facility, and again, they help maintain that. When there is an owner's corporation, while you live in that property, you will pay annual fees. Those annual fees can vary greatly. Some owners' corporations, it's only a couple of $100, whereas some bigger estates, it can be a few thousand when they have lots of amenities and all that kind of stuff. So it's very important to be aware that if you do buy a unit that does have an owner's corporation, that on top of your rates and your water outgoings and all that kind of stuff, you'll also have a yearly outgoing for the owner's corporation. I guess the next sort of style that people buy, and it's one a lot of people may be familiar with, is buying in a retirement village. So this is a really big financial and legal decision, and it's important that you get both legal and financial advice before doing this, especially after the sale of your home, because you'll find there might be a very large upfront contribution. So the process, I guess, is, and the first thing that always needs to happen is you need to go onto a wait list often to get into these places. So, you know, these are the lifestyle villages, I guess, where, you know, there's a few houses and each has 2 bedrooms, and it's designed for over 55s or something like that. So you may need to pay a fee to join a waiting list, and you know, waiting lists can vary very greatly. There's also can be a substantial ingoing fee when you do get in. So, you know, it could be up to a few $100,000. So it's an initial contribution. It can be structured in many different ways. So it could be structured as a deposit or a contribution or something like that. So it's important to be aware of the different ways. It's also important to know how much of that will be refunded or is likely to be refunded, because it's common to have a non-refundable portion of that amount of money that you're initially contributing, which is likely going to come from the sale of your house. You're also going to have, in a retirement village, ongoing management fees, similar to an owner's corporation, I guess, for like areas like roads, gardens. Many retirement villages have amenities like tennis courts and pools and gyms and libraries. So those management fees essentially keep those going, as well as the staff who supports them. This should be specified in the contract when you sign, and these fees need to stay relatively similar. They can increase annually with what's called CPI, or they can increase under some other circumstances when, you know, all parties agree or there's a substantial increase in staffing costs. It's also important to note that a retirement village can collect what's called special levies. So this is when the retirement village needs extra money to pay for perhaps a project or some repairs. They can only pass one every 12 months to do a special levy, but you will need to contribute to that, and it will be in the contract. Now, in addition to all that, there are different ways that a retirement village contract can be structured and the way you can sort of own it. So the majority are loan and lease. So you essentially put in a large amount of money at the start and you pay a lease fee during the whole time you were there, as well as management fees as well for, you know, keeping the roads tidy and managing those facilities that are around. And you'll need to have that incoming contribution set up at the start. The next is some places also offer for you to purchase. This is very similar to buying a property like an owner's corporation. So you become an owner of the property that you buy. Once it's bought, you will be a member of the owner's corporation itself and contribute to all those fees associated. It is very similar to buying a unit, like I said, but you'll still have that incoming fee very likely. And again, it's important to read that contract carefully to figure out what your financial contributions are going to be coming in. It is a little bit uncommon, but a different version is what's called a company title, and that's when you buy an interest in the company that owns the retirement village, and that gives you the right to reside in one of the properties. This is extremely complex and it's very important that you get legal advice. Although, like I said, it's not that common. Very similar is also a unit trust arrangement. So when a trustee for a trust owns the land and you become a member of the trust. And when you move out, and same with the company trust, you sell your interest in the company or in the unit trust. So again, very complex legal structures there that you definitely need to be advised on. The final point I want to make about retirement villages is you need to understand the consequences of leaving. As you had an incoming fee when you moved into the retirement village, you'll also likely have a departure fee. This can be calculated in a variety of different ways. It might be stipulated in the contract. It should be stipulated in the contract, sorry. But there will also be an amount that's non-refundable from your initial deposit. And it's also important to note that the village can continue to charge fees to you even after you've moved out. So perhaps you've moved out of the unit, but it's not occupied yet. It's likely that you'll still be incurring all those management charges. So again, it's important to understand the different consequences and, like I said, a very big financial decision. So that's just a very briefly touching on one of the many, many consequences. It's also important with these arrangements that even though you're putting a lot of money in, you're not building or likely to not be building equity the same way you would in an investment property. So again, it's important to get that advice of where your money is best going to go, and a financial planner can help you with that. The next type of retirement we're talking about is a retirement park. A little bit less common, and they work very similar to caravan parks. So the structure essentially is that you own a relocatable home on the property, but you lease the land it's based on. So you could move your home between parks, although it seems fairly arduous. But the land it's based on is only leased. So your home, I guess, is a good way of thinking about this, is your home can be included in your will because it's an asset, but the land it's based on you pay for weekly because you do not own it, is owned by the park. In most cases, you will not need to pay an ingoing contribution fee like you would with a retirement village, but it's likely you'll pay a departure fee when you go. Like I said, covered by the same sort of law and area as caravan parks, as opposed to retirement villages, which are covered by their own set of legislation. There will often be two contracts involved in this purchase, and that being a lease for the land, but also a contract to purchase the portable home that's on the land if, for whatever reason, you're not bringing your own. So there's what's called a site agreement, which is for the lease of the land, and then there's the dwelling agreements, which are for the dwelling itself. So again, a different sort of structure, and you've also got to be expecting to pay a weekly or fortnightly amount to lease the property. Finally, and again a little less common, is what's called a rental village. So this is a long-term rental property in an area that is specified for, maybe the over 55s or retirement purposes. There's no ingoing contribution, which is a benefit, but you will not own the property. So it is essentially rent, just as you're renting a property outside a retirement sort of situation. So the rent normally comes out fortnightly, and it's linked to the aged care pension and rental assistance, and it can be taking a certain percentage. So 85%, 100% will come from your rental assistance, and maybe 85% will come from your aged care pension. So again, something to be conscious of where the money is going to be coming from in that situation. And again, you won't be building any equity because you will be renting, however that may be preferable to you. That's a brief summary of all the different ways that retirement living can be structured. There's obviously, like I said, most of these require some more in-depth legal advice, and should you have any questions, I do encourage you to come in and get some advice to make sure it's tailored to your situation, but also speak to financial planners about what's going to be the best path to make sure you're maximising your savings and your superannuation, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, any questions, please contact our office for make an appointment and have a discussion that's tailored to your situation. Thank you very much for joining me this morning.